Karoline Leavitt was told to take off her cross in first class so others wouldn't feel offended. What happened next? Done the entire cabin and exposed something deeper. Karoline Leavitt didn't expect anything out of the ordinary that morning. Her flight from Dallas to Boston was just under 4 hours, long enough to get some work done. Not long enough to get too comfortable. She'd flown this route dozens of times before, always in first class. When her schedule allowed, it wasn't about luxury for her, it was about efficiency peacetime. To think she arrived at Dallas Love Field just after 7:00 a.m., pulling her carry-on behind her. Nothing flashy, a sleek black leather bag. Her outfit was just as simple: pressed slacks, navy blouse, and a tailored blazer around her neck. A small silver cross glinted gently against her skin. She didn't wear it to make a statement. She wore it because it meant something to her. The gate agent greeted her with a smile and scanned her ticket. First class. 2A. Enjoy your flight, Miss Leavitt. Karoline nodded, thanked her, and stepped onto the jet bridge inside the cabin. She settled into her seat, storing her bag neatly in the overhead. The seat was by the window, her favorite spot. She liked being able to look out as the plane rose through the clouds. She took out her tablet, scrolled through her emails, and replied to a few staffers on the East Coast, who are already halfway through. There are mornings as passengers continued boarding. She sipped the water the attendant had brought. The mood was calm, light conversation. A couple in the road behind her was discussing a family reunion in Vermont. A man across the aisle was already asleep, baseball cap pulled low over his eyes. Karoline glanced at her watch. The cabin doors would be closing any minute. That's when it happened. A female flight attendant, tall mid-40s with perfectly tied back hair and a clipped tone, stopped at Karoline's row. Her name tag read Mallory. Without so much as a greeting, she looked directly at the cross around Karoline's neck. "You'll need to take that off," she said flatly. Karoline looked up slightly, caught off guard. "I'm sorry, Mallory," sighed the necklace, the cross. "We've had complaints in the past. It's better if you just remove it." "Now before there's an issue," Karoline blinked, "is there some sort of policy against religious symbols? It's not about policy." Mallory replied, her voice sharper. "This time, some passengers find it unnecessary. We try to maintain a neutral environment in first class. Please take it off." Karoline held her composure. She didn't react right away, just looked at the woman for a moment, then said calmly, "I'd rather not. It's personal. It's not bothering anyone." The flight attendant's expression hardened. "I wasn't asking. I'm telling you, remove it, or we'll have to ask you to deplane." That's when he'd started to turn. The man behind her shifted in his seat. The couple stopped their conversation. Even the sleeping passenger stirred. Karoline didn't budge. "I'm not removing it. If this is such a serious issue, I'd like to speak with your supervisor." Mallory leaned in slightly, voice low but tense. "I don't know who you think you are, but you're not above the rules here." Karoline raised an eyebrow. "I never said I was." Mallory stood upright and walked briskly to the front of the cabin, disappearing behind the curtain. The entire first-class section was now quiet, the kind of silence that follows something unexpected, like when a glass shatters in a room full of strangers. Karoline glanced out the window. She didn't feel angry. Not yet, just surprised. It wasn't the first time someone had said something rude to her. It wasn't even the first time someone had had a problem with the cross. But it was the first time it had happened so boldly in such a public and unnecessary way. And something about it didn't sit right. But Karoline had no idea just how far this would go, or who in that cabin was already paying attention. Mallory returned just as the last few passengers were finding their seats. Her stride was quick, her expression unreadable. But there was something clipped in the way she walked. Like she was gearing up for a fight. Trailing a few feet behind her was another crew member, a younger man, mid-30s, maybe with a more neutral face. His name tag read Lewis, and he didn't speak right away. He hovered near the front as Mallory approached Karoline again. "Ma'am," Mallory began, her voice firmer. "Now, we asked you to remove your necklace. If you're refusing to comply, we'll have to document it as a passenger disturbance." Karoline looked up from her tablet. Still calm disturbance. "I'm sitting in my seat, quietly doing nothing wrong. I already explained the issue." Mallory replied tightly. "Religious symbols, especially large ones, can be offensive to some passengers. We've had problems before, and this isn't negotiable." Karoline let out a small breath. "Steady, this cross is less than 2 inches long. It's not flashing, it's not in anyone's face, and more importantly, it's mine. I have every right to wear it." Mallory crossed her arms, "Not when it makes others uncomfortable." Karoline glanced around. "Has someone actually complained?" Mallory didn't answer. That silence was louder than anything else in the cabin. It was Lewis who finally stepped forward, looking between the two women. "Miss Leavitt, I'm the flight supervisor. I'd like to understand what's going on. She's refusing to remove a religious item," Mallory cut in, "and she's being combative." Karoline turned to Louis, her tone calm but firm. "I'm not being combative. I'm just not removing something that matters to me, and I haven't raised my voice once." Louis nodded slowly. Understood. He turned to Mallory. "Did a passenger file a complaint?" Mallory's jaw tensed. "I said we've had complaints before. I'm trying to prevent another issue." Louis paused, "But no one has said anything today." Mallory said nothing. The silence hung again, heavier this time. That's when the man in 2B, the seat across the aisle from Karoline, spoke up. He was in his 60s, clean cut, wearing a gray pullover and glasses. "Excuse me," he said, I've been sitting here the whole time, nobody complained. She's done absolutely nothing wrong." The couple in row 3 chimed into, the woman said, "This doesn't make sense. It's a necklace. She's not bothering anybody." Lewis looked at Mallory again, something shifting behind his eyes. "Okay, let's de-escalate this," but Mallory wasn't done. "She thinks she can throw her weight around," she muttered. "Not quietly enough." Karoline's brow lifted. "Excuse me." Mallory straightened her back. "People you always think the rules don't apply to them. You come in here flashing symbols, acting like you're above the rest of us." Karoline was no longer surprised. She was stunned. She stood now, slowly, keeping her voice measured. "I don't think I'm above anyone. I fly commercial, like everyone else. I asked a simple question, and I didn't deserve to be spoken to like that." Lewis, step between them. "Okay, that's enough." "Mallory, let's step to the front." Mallory didn't move right away, but after a moment, she turned and walked off. The tension stayed behind her like smoke. Karoline sat back down, her hands folded in her lap. The cross was still there, glinting faintly in the light. She could feel eyes on her now, not judging, but watching, waiting. Louis leaned in slightly. "Miss Leavitt, I apologize for the situation. Let me talk to the captain and see how we want to handle this. Please stay seated, for now." She nodded. "Of course." He walked off. The curtains swished behind him for a moment. There was quiet again, but this time it was a different kind of silence, the kind that buzzed just beneath the surface. Karoline reached for her phone, not to record, not yet, just to have it near her, in case she wasn't trying to start a fight. But she wasn't about to back down from one either. But before she could decide whether to make a call or let it go, something unexpected happened, and it changed the entire tone of the cabin. The curtain parted again. But this time, it wasn't Lewis or Mallory who walked through it. It was the captain, tall, serious, early 50s with salt and pepper hair under his cap. He had the look of someone who didn't deal in drama, but also didn't shy away from it. He approached Karoline's rows, slowly, glancing around at the passengers, all of whom were now fully alert. There was no pretending this wasn't unfolding in full view. "Miss Leavitt?" he asked, his voice calm but direct. Karoline stood. "Yes, I'm Captain Riggs." I've been briefed on the situation, but I'd like to hear your version. You have every right to speak for yourself. That caught her off guard a little, not the fact that he came, but the way he said it. Like he actually wired what she had to say. She took a breath. I was approached by a flight attendant who demanded I remove this necklace, she said lightly, touching the cross at her collarbone. She said it might offend other passengers, though no one had actually complained. When I refused, she became confrontational. I asked for a supervisor. Riggs nodded. I see. Were you disruptive in any way? No, said the man across the aisle. Immediately, she didn't raise her voice, didn't move. That woman came up to her and started something. Riggs turned to the other passengers. Anyone else have an issue with the necklace? The couple in row 3 shook their heads. No, said the woman. This whole thing was blown out of proportion. Riggs looked back at Karoline. I apologize for the disruption. That shouldn't have happened. Karoline's voice was still calm, but firmer. Now, I don't want anyone fired. I just want to sit in peace, like everyone else. That was when a voice came from the back of the cabin, someone recording on their phone. Wait a second, the woman said. Are you Karoline Leavitt? Karoline hesitated, then gave a small nod. Yes, the air changed. Passengers who hadn't been paying attention now looked up, some murmured, a few pulled out their phones. One of the younger men in first class leaned forward. Weren't you in the White House? Karoline replied evenly. Yes, I served as assistant press secretary. There it was, recognition, and not just from the passengers. Captain Riggs gave a small sigh, not out of frustration, but realization. He understood what this was turning into. Not just a customer service issue, not just a heated exchange, a potential public incident. He glanced over his shoulder and said to Lewis, who had returned quietly behind him, let's get legal on the line, now. Lewis moved quickly back through the curtain. Karoline remained still. She hadn't asked for any of this. She hadn't said who she was. She hadn't used her name as leverage. She only stood her ground. But now the cabin had turned into something else, something charged. She could feel it. The man across the aisle gave her a look of quiet solidarity. Crazy world, he mentored. You wear a cross, and that's offensive now. Karoline gave a faint smile. Apparently, passengers were murmuring again. A few passengers pulled out their phones. Quiet conversations rippled through the seats. Nothing loud, nothing aggressive, just a collective sense of what just happened and why at the front, Mallory had reappeared, whispering with another crew member. She looked furious, but now more cornered than confident. Her face had flushed a deep red, and her arms were crossed like she was bracing for impact. Captain Riggs returned to Karoline's row. We've alerted the ground team in Boston. There will be someone waiting at the gate to speak with you if you choose to file a formal complaint. Karoline shook her head. I'm not here to file anything. I just want to finish this flight without more confrontation. The captain nodded. Once we'll make sure of that. He returned to the cockpit. Karoline sat back down slowly. She looked out the window, then closed her eyes for a moment. She was still holding it together. But there was an edge to the quiet now, a pressure building just beneath the surface. The woman in 3A leaned over. I'm really sorry that happened. Did I doubt to you? Karoline opened her eyes. Thank you. She glanced down at the cross again, still resting calmly against her skin. No, she wasn't going to take it off. Not now, not later. But the real shift didn't happen in the air. It started the moment they touched down. The wheels hit the tarmac at Logan Airport with a soft jolt, a subtle bounce, then the long roll toward the gate. For most passengers, it marked the end of a routine trip. For Karoline, it marked the beginning of something else entirely. She didn't know who had called ahead. Maybe it was the captain, maybe Louis, maybe corporate had already caught wind of the videos now circulating online. Several passengers had quietly filmed the confrontation. A few had even asked her name. Mid-flight, at least 2 people near the back had been scrolling through Google, whispering over photos on their screens. As the plane taxied, Karoline looked straight ahead, not anxious, just aware this wasn't her first time under a spotlight. But it was the first time the spotlight had found her. In the middle of an ordinary day when the seatbelt sign chimed off, Mallory made the usual announcements in a voice that had lost some of its edge. Her tongue was stiff, robotic. She didn't look back once passengers stood to grab their bags. Karoline stayed seated, waiting her turn. She never liked crowding the aisle, but this time she had another reason. Louis had discreetly told her that someone from corporate customer service would be waiting at the jet bridge. The man in 2B paused before exiting. He gave her a small nod of recognition, not the casual kind, but the kind you give someone who stood their ground when it counted. "You handled that well," he said quietly. "Those people would have lost it." Karoline gave a polite smile. "Thanks, I'm used to keeping my voice down." He gave a half chuckle, then walked off. When it was her turn, Karoline rose, grabbed her bag, and made her way toward the front. Mallory was standing stiffly near the galley. She didn't say anything. She didn't make eye contact. She stared straight ahead like Karoline wasn't even there at the aircraft door. A sharply dressed woman in a navy suit was waiting, holding a tablet. Her name tag read, J. Ramsey, Guest Relations Manager. She stepped forward immediately. "Miss Leavitt," she asked quietly. "Yes, would you mind stepping just into the jet bridge for a moment? We'd like to have a quick conversation off the main walkway." Karoline followed her. Still calm, the door to the cabin closed behind them. With a soft thud, Ramsey gestured to the side, where a tall man in a dark gray jacket stood with a notepad. He didn't speak, just gave a respectful nod. "I want to begin by apologizing." Ramsey said, "What happened on board does not reflect our values. We're reviewing the entire situation, including the actions of our employee. We take it seriously." Karoline crossed her arms lightly. "I didn't ask for special treatment. I just didn't want to be singled out. We understand. And for the record, there's no policy on this airline prohibiting personal religious jewelry." The man with the notepad finally spoke. "We're going to review the flight report, the footage, and the crew statements. We've already received a dozen emails from other passengers on the plane, some even included video." Karoline paused. "Video. Yes, ma'am, a few passengers recorded. The interaction, we expect more, will surface." Ramsey cleared her throat, gently. "Would you be comfortable giving a brief written statement before you leave the terminal? It's not required, of course, but it would help." Karoline thought for a moment. "Sure, but I'll do it on my terms." They led her to a small lounge just off the gate, usually reserved for pilots and staff. Quiet, no cameras, no crowd. As she typed out her statement, she thought about everything that had happened. Not just the embarrassment, not just the tone Mallory had used, but the quiet expectation that she was supposed to shrink herself to avoid making others uncomfortable. She hit send outside the room. She could hear her name again, this time from someone walking by. "She's that girl from the White House, right?" A soft ripple of recognition followed. She wasn't trying to be noticed, but people were starting to recognize her anyway. When she walked out of the lounge and headed toward the baggage claim, two passengers from the flight stopped her. "We sent our videos to corporate. One of them said they were out of line." Karoline smiled genuinely. "Thanks for speaking up." But while she was leaving the airport, the story was just landing online and spreading faster than she ever expected. By the time Karoline reached the sidewalk outside Logan Airport, her phone had started buzzing. She glanced down and saw a string of texts from a close friend in Washington, then another from someone she hadn't heard from in months. "Hey, are you okay? Saw a clip of you on a flight?" It's everywhere. She paused on the curb for a second, scanning her notifications, Twitter, Facebook, even a screenshot floating on Instagram stories. Someone had clipped the moment Mallory told her to take off the cross right before Karoline asked for a supervisor. The caption read, "Woman asked to remove cross necklace on flight. She turns out to be former White House staffer." Karoline took a deep breath. She hadn't planned to say anything publicly, but it looked like the decision was no longer just hers. She slid into the back seat of her rideshare, gave the driver a tired smile, and stared out the window as Boston passed by. Cold air, gray sky. A normal day on the outside. Nothing about it felt normal anymore. Back at her hotel, she opened her laptop. 2 major news outlets had already picked up the story. The airline's name was trending. The hashtags were everywhere. Comments range from disbelief to anger to personal stories from people who had similar experiences, being asked to hide change or quiet down because someone else might not approve. Karoline didn't rush to post. She knew better than that. Once you speak publicly, you can't take it back. But then her inbox chimed an email from the airline's corporate office. Not a generic message, a personal letter from the VP of Customer Experience. It read in part, "Miss Leavitt, we want to extend our sincere apology for the experience you endured aboard Flight 317. We are actively investigating the behavior of our crew member and reviewing the incident with our legal and training departments. We do not support the targeting of any passenger based on appearance, beliefs, or personal expression. You were treated unfairly. That is not acceptable." They also offered to refund her flight and extend a travel credit. Karoline sat with that for a moment. She could have taken it and moved on, let it fade out like so many stories do. But something inside her felt pulled towards something deeper, not about herself, but about what this moment meant. Because if she, with her background and name recognition, could be targeted so openly, what about the people who couldn't speak up? She opened her phone and recorded a short video. No edits, no filters, just her sitting by the window in a simple sweater, calm, direct, and clear. "I wasn't going to say anything publicly," she began, "but I think it's important to not, because I want attention, and not because I want revenge, but because what happened on that flight wasn't just about me. It's about a growing willingness to silence people for simply being who they are." She paused, then added, "I wore a cross on a flight that was enough for someone to decide I didn't belong in first class, that I was offensive, that I should be told to hide part of myself. I didn't raise my voice, I didn't threaten anyone, and I certainly didn't ask to be treated differently, but I won't apologize for what I believe, and neither should you." She posted the video. Within hours, it had 500,000 views. Comments poured in, people sharing stories of being shamed for wearing religious symbols, others expressing anger that it happened at all. A few tried to politicize it, but most people weren't thinking politics. They were thinking human. By the next morning, the airline released a full public statement. This time, it included Mallory's name. The flight attendant involved has been placed on administrative leave pending a full investigation. We are also implementing additional staff training to ensure all passengers are treated with respect and dignity, regardless of personal beliefs. Karoline read it over, then closed her laptop. She didn't feel victorious, just steady, like she'd done what needed to be done, not for headlines, but for principle. But before the attention faded, one more unexpected twist forced Karoline to reflect even deeper on where this really started and who she was becoming. Because of it, 3 days passed before Karoline received the second letter. This one came by mail, not email, handwritten on thick paper, with the airline's embossed logo in the corner. She knew before opening it that it was different, not because of the envelope, but because of the sender. It was from Mallory. The handwriting was elegant but slightly rushed, like it had been rewritten several times. "Miss Leavitt, I want to apologize for my behavior. I reacted poorly, and I let personal feelings influence how I did my job. It was unprofessional and wrong. I've worked for the airline for over 20 years and have never had an incident like this, but that doesn't excuse how I treated you. I'm sorry." Karoline read the letter twice. She wasn't sure how to feel. A part of her was relieved. Another part was cautious. Was it sincere? Was it pressure from corporate? Or maybe both? She didn't respond. Not immediately. She needed time. The public attention hadn't gone away. People were still emailing news stations, wanted interviews. Bloggers were dissecting the story, arguing over what it meant. Some were kind, some were not. That didn't surprise her. She knew how narratives could be twisted to fit whatever box people needed them to fit. But through all the noise, one message stood out. It came from a woman in Ohio, not famous, not connected. She said she was a single mom who had worn a small Star of David necklace to a job interview. Once the interviewer asked her politely but firmly if she might remove it to avoid stirring anything. She hadn't told anyone that story before. That message hit Karoline harder than any of the viral tweets or TV segments because that woman didn't have a title to fall back on. No audience, no camera rolling. And she still remembered every detail years later. Karoline sat at her kitchen table with a coffee growing cold beside her, rereading the letter from Mallory and the message from Ohio. The contrast was sharp. One was trying to make peace, the other was a quiet reminder that what happened on that plane wasn't isolated. She finally pulled out a blank card and started writing back. "Mallory, thank you for your letter. I believe in accountability, but I also believe in forgiveness. I accept your apology. I hope the airline gives you the space to reflect and grow. I hope you treat future passengers with fairness, no matter what they wear around their neck. We've all made mistakes. What matters is what we do next." She mailed it that afternoon. Later that evening, she sat down for a short podcast interview, her first public conversation since posting the video. The host, a quiet woman named Dana, who ran a small platform focused on faith and expression, asked her what she had learned from the whole thing. Karoline didn't hesitate. "I learned that silence is safer, but it rarely leads to change. And I learned that standing your ground calmly clearly can shift more than just a moment. It can shift someone's entire perspective." Dana asked if she felt like the situation had made her more guarded. Karoline paused, then smiled. "No, if anything, it reminded me why I started speaking publicly in the first place. Not to be loud, but to be real." The next day, she received a new kind of message, this time from a teenage girl in Arizona. She had seen the clip online. She said she'd been hiding her own beliefs for a long time. Scared of being mocked at school after seeing the video, she decided to wear her necklace again. That's when Karoline realized something. This wasn't just about a plane or a necklace or a rude crew member. It was about the thousands of small moments when people are asked to dim themselves just enough not to cause trouble, to disappear just a little, and how much damage that does over time. But long after the headlines faded, one question kept circling Karoline's mind, and it pushed her to confront something deeper than she expected. Weeks later, the story had mostly moved on. The internet found a new outrage, news cycles spun forward, and the platform that once erupted with hashtags now returned to its usual noise. But Karoline hadn't forgotten, not because of the media storm, but because of what stayed with her after the noise had died down. She was sitting in a quiet park near Beacon Hill one chilly afternoon, coffee and hand coat, buttoned-up scarf around her neck, not trying to be recognized, just needing space to think. She watched as a father helped his little girl onto the swings nearby. The girl wore a pink beanie and laughed loudly, her mittens flying as she pointed toward the scone. Karoline smiled. That right there was freedom, not just the right to exist, but to express joy, to wear what you believe, and to be loved for who you are, not silenced for it. She thought back to that flight, the tight cabin, the pressure, the silence from some, the bravery from others, and mostly she thought about what she could have done differently and what she wouldn't change at all. She didn't like confrontation, never had, but sometimes confrontation found you. And in those moments, what mattered was how you responded. She had kept her voice steady even when it shook a little inside. She hadn't fired back with insults. She hadn't raised her hand or slammed a trade table. She stood still, she spoke, clearly she let the situation reveal itself, without losing herself in the process, and that she realized was something deeper than confidence. That was conviction, what struck her most. After everything wasn't the apology or the video views, it was the way people responded, privately. Messages from strangers who never imagined they could push back when someone told them to hide stories from people in small towns, big cities, quiet homes, people who didn't think they were allowed to speak up. One woman had messaged her just days ago. She was a nurse in Seattle who wore a necklace with a small saint's charm tucked under her scrubs. Her supervisor once told her to keep personal things at home. She did until she saw Karoline's video. Now she wore over her uniform without apology. Karoline leaned back on the bench and watched the tree sway. She wasn't trying to start a movement, but maybe sometimes a moment is enough to nudge someone toward courage. She looked down at the cross around her neck, the same one she wore that day. It had belonged to her grandmother, a quiet woman with a backbone of iron, the kind who believed in kindness but not cowardice, who taught her that the point of faith wasn't to hide behind it, it was to live through it. Karoline reached for her phone, not to record, not to post, but just to take a picture of the park, the swing set, the child laughing. It was a reminder, not everything needed to be shared. Some things just needed to be remembered back at home. That night, she finally responded to the girl from Arizona, the teenager who had found the courage to wear her necklace. Again, Karoline kept her message short. You don't have to fight loud to be strong, just don't disappear. The world needs to see you. She hit send. Then she put the phone down, made some tea, and sat by the window with the lights off, letting the quiet hold her, but not silence her. This experience had changed her, but not into someone different. It had reminded her of who she already was. And sometimes, that's the hardest thing to hold on to in a world that keeps asking you to be smaller. If this story moved you, share with someone who might need to hear it. And don't forget to subscribe for more stories that matter, because small moments can carry big meaning.